Hello, Shri Hari sir.
Yes, we can start, sir.
Well,
with the kind permission of Honorable Principal, sir, we can start.
Yes. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I welcome you all to this day 4 of the FDP, 1 week FDP on module on curriculum design and pedagogy for autonomous colleges from Maharashtra. I'm your co-host today, Dr. Umesh Jagdale. I'm very happy to welcome you all the participants, dignitaries. Let me update you on the session on the schedule today. We have a session on assessment and evaluation by Professor Rekha Papu ma'am, Associate Professor and Chairperson, TISS Azim Premji School of Education, TISS Hyderabad. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you. Without wasting any more time, I would suggest Professor Pingle sir to take it over and introduce the resource person for section 1.
Respected Principal of our college, Dr. Professor Arun Gaikwad, sir. Honorable Resource Person for the day, Dr. Rekha Papu ma'am, and all the participants and my dear colleagues. Today we have with us Dr. Rekha Papu, who will introduce us to the assessment and evaluation methods in higher education. Dr. Rekha Papu ma'am is an associate professor with the Azim Premji School of Education at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Hyderabad. Her research interests are in the areas of education, development, women's studies, and cultural studies. She has published in these areas in academic journals and anthologies, as well as in magazines and newspapers. She has also edited the first Social Watch report of Andhra Pradesh titled Rethinking Priorities, Making Policy as if People Mattered. Before joining TISS, Rekha Papu Madam was the coordinator and director of Anveshi Research Center for Women's Studies, Hyderabad, convener of the Andhra Pradesh Social Watch, and research consultant with the Higher Education Cell of the Center for the Study of Culture and Society. She has been a Fulbright Tata Visiting Fellow at the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, University of Michigan, USA, a Visiting Fellow at the Institute for Development Studies, University of Sussex, UK, and a Key Technology Partnership Fellow at the University of Technology, Sydney. Ma'am has undertaken study projects and impact assessments for a range of institutions and organizations, including the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, Wipro Applying Thought in Schools, Bengaluru, Interchurch Organization for Development Cooperation, Netherlands, German Agro Action, Delhi, Oxfam, Hyderabad, and Tata Trusts, Mumbai. Even as her primary engagement continues to be with academics in terms of teaching, developing curriculum, and conducting research, Madam aspires to write fiction, narrative flow, and finesse in all forms, whether written, spoken, or in the visual medium, and as fiction or non-fiction fascinates her. She will today guide us on very important aspect of education, that is assessment and evaluation. All of us here, ma'am, the participants of this faculty development program, the convener, myself, and the organizers welcome you for this FDP, and we are looking forward to listen to you. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm happy to be here among colleagues at different institutes, colleges, mainly in Maharashtra. Yes, I realize that I'm coming in on the 4th day, but I'll need some guidance on how you've been conducting these sessions in terms of when the break takes place. But let me just explain how I have planned this session. I will use a PowerPoint to speak about assessments and evaluations in higher education. I can go on for an hour and a half, and we could follow it up with a discussion, and then towards the end of it, based on our on my presentation, our discussion, your understanding of it, and whether you want to also further rework the ideas that I'm coming up with, if you could then look at the assessment tasks or activities that each of you undertake for your particular course in your college, and rework that or think through working on it, reflecting on it. I mean, it not necessarily rework. You may want to reflect on it to see what aspects you would want to carry forward, how you would want to revise if there is any need. So we could do that. I just wanted you to come in, Professor Pingley, to let me know, should I, is there a break at any point in time? Would you want me to stop? I'm happy for people to interrupt me at any point in time. You can stop me to get clarification or give your own comments, because all of you are as experienced in this field as I am. So we the reference to me is an expert resource person, but we have all been into this task of assessment and evaluation for as long as we have been here. So yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, the experience for last 3 days has been, fascinating. The participants have been really participating well in all these activities that have been taking place. So I guess 1.5 hours, as you said, that would be fine. And then we can follow it up with questions. And then we, of course, have planned an activity where the participants break up into few rooms, okay, and that they do a task on a common Google Doc.
All right.
And you have been made co-host, so you can, of course, share your slides.
All right. So I'll then try and keep my presentation brief so that we can probably go in for more discussion, but let's see how we proceed. I'll just share my screen and use the PPT. And I just want to repeat that please feel free to interrupt me at any point in time, especially if it's not making sense, then I think we will. Yes, this is what I'll be speaking on. Yeah, to begin with, just to go over our understanding of assessments. And as I said, all of us, we do assess student work and they come in at certain points in time during our academic year, and we carry out evaluations. Some are overt, some are not necessarily something that even we are conscious of, but there are definitely evaluation tasks that we give out in different forms. So one of the most common perception, and I'm referring to it, I've put misperception in brackets only to say that this is a limited perception. It is not necessarily a misperception. It's a misperception to the extent that one thinks assessments do not go beyond it. The most common understanding of assessment is that it will test student comprehension, and that an assessment is a tool for grading. Not that either of this is untrue. Yes, an assessment does test what the student has comprehended. It's a test of learning. It is also a tool for scoring, grading, but that is a very instrumental understanding of assessment. The notion of assessment, as we want to look at it, is much broader than just considering it as a test or a tool for grading. So the larger understanding of assessments that we may want to go with is that it is really a tool to support us in our teaching practices, and to gauge what kind of learning has taken place among the students. I think for teaching, this understanding of whether the strategies are working, not working, how they could be changed, what is required, in which direction does one want to go, that becomes extremely important. And one is seeing assessments as necessarily being linked to how we reach the educational goals that we have envisaged or that a particular institution has in mind. So this would be the role of assessments. And as I show in the next slide, grading is the part that it's about this common perception that grading is what assessment is about. But the distinction would be that they are different. So assessment does not mean only grading, as we were just discussing. that assessment, that while grading is necessarily an evaluation, it involves scoring, marking, using a letter grade, putting students in a certain position in the kind of grading scheme that an institution may have. While all of that refers to grading, when we're talking of assessment, we are looking at gathering all kinds of information that will help the teacher understand whether there has been some learning or not from the student. Yeah. Kuratilan Chowki's raised their hand. Is there some comment that you had?
No, I think it would have been probably by mistake.
Okay.
If you, yeah. Chowki ma'am, if you really want to ask something, you can probably type it in the chat box. Yeah.
All right. Or you can just stop me and ask, because then I would move from the screen to the chat. But either way is all right. You could type in your question, you could raise your hand, or you could just, whichever way, you could just speak up. So that is fine. So I was talking about the need for a distinction between, need for distinction to be made between assessment and grading. Grading is one part. Assessment will definitely draw on grading processes, but it is not the be all and the end all. One would go beyond that to understand how far the student has learned, what kind of further inputs are required, where the difficulties are. So different kinds of assessments help us evaluate whether there is student learning or not. And this is the most important function of assessments rather than just grading. So the reason there's so much emphasis on grading, I mean, we are aware of the exam culture within most educational systems, most societies, where the credentialing function of educational institutions, by which you say that this person is fit to move to the next level or fit for a job. So mostly grading seems to perform that kind of a function. But if you're speaking about assessment, then we have to necessarily link it to the possibility of understanding what kind of learning has taken place. Okay, so this is where one makes a distinction between the two. And also in our present educational systems, very often learning strategy. So we are teaching and there is learning, that is one part of it. And then assessment and evaluation is regarded as separate. So they both seem to stand apart from one another. And when we emphasize the notion of assessment in this broad sense, one is trying to say that they're actually linked. Okay? So there are learning objectives that there is, one needs to understand education, and this is where I would want to lay the emphasis, that learning objectives, teaching strategies, assessments form a composite whole. They are not separate. They shouldn't necessarily be separated from one another and seen as serial aspects, that you first get the curriculum, then you evolve teaching strategies, and after the teaching is done, you have the assessments. So one is attempting to break this linearity that has been established between learning objectives, teaching strategies, and assessments, to argue that we need to take these along simultaneously. They need to go all need to go together rather than as separate processes. So when you're talking of learning objectives, which is largely encapsulated in curriculum documents are, I mean, this is what may have been covered earlier. Basically, the plan for how does one reach educational goals, which also means clarifying for ourselves what are the educational goals. And this is mostly a collective process. So it's not for an individual teacher to say what the curriculum should be, but then the curriculum document lays them out in broad enough terms for the individual teacher to then adapt, to interpret, and take forward, to map that pathway of how one reaches those learning objectives, reaches those learning goals. And so these would be through the teaching strategies, which are most of it are within the classroom. Then there are activities which involve, for instance, experiential learning or writing, carrying out field work, doing dissertations. So there would be different kinds of teaching that are within the classroom and some that are outside. And then there are those various tasks which reveal whether the students have achieved the learning objectives that have been identified. So our main question that one would want to ask in relation to assessment is what kinds of tasks will give us this clarity about whether the students have achieved the learning objectives or not. And so this, most of us, when we are setting different kinds of assessments, we do have a particular objective in mind. This is what we will go through today, I'm hoping will help us get a little more self-reflexive about how we are setting these tasks, how we are even identifying that this particular task is an important one. And that would mean going beyond meeting this mandatory goal that we do have assessments, right? So exams are mandated by the UGC, are mandated by the institution. One has to necessarily go through them. But there's also a possibility of making our own teaching much more enjoyable and challenging for us if we are linking it to these other aspects, which is learning objectives and how we teach, if we are linking up learning objectives, teaching strategies, and assessments. Okay. Yeah, so there are different kinds of assessments. I'll go into that, but just in case there's any comment on whether this is necessarily the scenario in our country, in our institutions about separating these out. If there's anything, then if anybody has another point of view, we could come in with that, or I'll just go ahead. Yeah. So kinds of assessments, there are different, I mean, one uses kinds of forms in different ways. So of course there are assignments, there are tests, there are presentations, or individual oral presentations, group presentations. There is doing project work, and then project report, writing up the report. So there are these kinds of assessments, but broadly, if we were to categorize the forms of kinds of assessment, we would have them as formative and summative assessments. I think that is again something that most of you are familiar with. I'm just checking, I think there is a comment in the chat box. Okay. Group discussions, yes. There are these kinds, so one does have different kinds of assessments. Different teachers have their own preferences of what they would want to give as an assessment, and they would have their reasons for doing so as well. So we would just need to be a little more self-reflexive about why exactly this particular mode of assessment seems to work better. Sometimes it works for the students as well as the teachers. So what kinds of assessments are those? And then what are the other possibilities that one can try out? So when we're speaking of different kinds of assessment, there are formative assessments. These one of the terms for formative assessment is that they are low stakes. And one calls them low stakes precisely because the summative assessment is the high stakes assessment, right? This summative assessment comes at the end of an instructional unit or a semester or an academic year. It comes at the end of having covered whatever was planned for. So the underlying assumption is that when you're giving a summative assessment, the education, you are testing to see whether the educational goal has been achieved. So it is high stakes in this sense that when you say summative, it means that at the end of this, this is it. I mean, this is the end of the assessment cycle, and probably there is no possibility of going ahead. This is the final one, summative as in final. right? But of course, you can also use summative as formative, as something that will inform your next level of teaching. There is definitely scope for that, but one for purposes of ease of understanding assessments, one is referring to it as formative assessments that are taking place in the course of the teaching. And then there are the summative assessments. Yes, so, Dr. Supriya. Dr. Supriya had a hand raised. I'm assuming
if there are
that
any questions, I think one of participants will jot them down in the chat box alone. There's one question, I guess.
Yes.
Sarla Menon ma'am, she is asking question. It's a rather detailed one. Dr. Radhakrishnan Commission in 1848 commented, if anything you have to do with university education, it regarding evaluation. Even after 70 years since then, we are still experimenting regarding how to enhance the evaluation system in India. Recently, UGC set up a committee under chairmanship of Dr. M.M. Sarokhe to reform evaluation system in 2019. Still, we are not able to bring out any consent on this issue. How many more years we have to wait to bring out quality evaluation programs in India?
Okay, I think maybe we are at a good moment today because the earlier system, there was the affiliation to a university for the colleges, and then one had to follow the same pattern of evaluation that was given from a central level, right? So the fact that we are moving into, and the NEP may have indicated that also, that the push towards more autonomy for institutes, this is what will bring about those changes in the assessment patterns. As long as one is looking at it in from a centralized position, then I don't know if we can speak of reform in any meaningful way. But the fact that an individual teacher can plan the assessment, and I'm speaking from the location of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, where there is a high degree of autonomy. So one plans one's assessments. And there is that definitely that scope for that UGC itself provides. So we'll have to see what kinds of recommendations the committee comes out with. But I don't think it's a hopeless situation, probably. But it's not just a central directive about reforms. It's also a question of individual teachers, faculty being equipped to understand what assessments mean. I think that part becomes much more important. And even within our existing system, unless there is a directive from, you already handed over the question paper that comes from a central board, the formative assessments definitely also you can go into, even for formative assessments, there is a possibility which I don't think UGC necessarily stops us from carrying out these kinds of assessments. One can always devise, plan different kinds of assessments to understand student learning. Okay. Let me, I think the biggest reform for assessments as such in conceptual terms has come to us, and this is probably a term that many of you are already familiar with, especially those within the field of education would have definitely come across this term, and probably it is a familiar one for most as well. Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. This is Dr. Preeti saying, I think autonomous colleges give that freedom to assess students according to teachers' choices. Teachers can experiment a lot when it comes to assessment. Yes, that's my sense too, that one, of course, as faculty, all of us are aware that there are various kinds of demands on our time. There are different kinds of pressures, but if one is prioritizing assessments and making attempts to combine it with meaningfully with the teaching that one is carrying out, I think there is a lot of scope. Yes, about novel assessment methods like group discussions, role plays, quiz contests, etc. Yeah, you will definitely be able to use these different modalities. But what I would like to focus on a bit is about the principles. Even when you're having group discussions, you're having quiz, you're having projects or term papers, or anything else that you think of as innovative, I think we would probably need to pay attention to what is involved in that assessment. How is it connecting to our assessment of the learning itself? What level of learning are we actually gauging, right? And then how will we proceed forward? Okay, so before, and this is what Bloom's taxonomy does. It draws attention to assessments and learning objectives itself, or the educational goals, educational objectives. And the work that they brought out in 1956 is actually titled Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. And the first handbook was on the cognitive domain. So I will go into Bloom's taxonomy a bit and also look at the revision of this particular taxonomy. And I think it does provide us a lot of scope for not only for thinking through assessments, but also thinking about the learning strategies that can be drawn from the assessments. But before I do that, I just want to go to the chat. There are a few messages there. So let me just look at that. And if anybody else wants to add to these, we could take that up also. If I were to go from, yeah.
Maybe I'll read it for you, ma'am, if you want more. Yeah. Dr. Sarla Menon again. How can we construct syllabus for testing effective domain in formal setting?
I think before that, there are a few questions.
Yes, comments. There are. Is it always important to have summative assessment only? Can there be other methods to evaluate? Priya Sundar Rajan, ma'am.
Right. Before that, Dr. Anil is saying assessment should be impartial. What exactly do we mean by being impartial, and what purpose does it serve? Probably we should explore this as well, because this is thinking that has come to us from many years, that assessment should be objective, it should be impartial. What purpose does it serve? And in what way does one want objectivity or impartiality? This is a question that we would need to ask as well. And why is it always important to have summative assessment only? So you have completed an entire semester of teaching or an entire academic year. If you're saying assessments help you understand whether the student has learned or not learned, just a summative assessment, which is usually an end semester or an end year exam, what does that tell you about the student's learning? And is there scope to then address those learning deficits or learning gaps that the student may have? So I think again, Dr. Priya Sundarajan, you can probably come back to explain why this summative assessments only is most important. I personally would disagree with that. In fact, it has done a great deal of harm. And yes, there are other methods to evaluate. So we could look into it. We could have more discussion about it, because this summative assessment, which are called as high stakes assessments, are do or die kinds of assessments. They're not necessarily assessments that are nurturing, that help a student flourish, grow, understand the particular discipline or the subject that you're teaching, and move forward. And this would be the real goal of assessments, including summative assessment. Okay. How can we construct syllabus for testing effective domain? Yes, this is again a very important part, that higher educational institutions focus a great deal on the cognitive domain. and not on the other domains that Bloom's taxonomy talks about, which is the affective domain as well as the psychomotor domain. Even in my presentation today, I will largely focus on the cognitive domain and not so much. And maybe if we have the time, we'll come back to looking at the affective domain and what can be done to gauge whether learning is taking place in the affective domain. Yes, I agree with you, Dr. Manasi. Right, Dr. Meeta too is making a similar comment. Anybody else wants to come back potential individually and in a group, and it should also be able to gauge the soft skills and technical skills. Now, whether you want to gauge the soft skills or the technical skills or soft skills and technical skills, it's up to the faculty. I mean, if your educational goal is to impart soft skills, then you would want to assess that. If your educational goal is to impart certain aspects of the particular discipline, whether it's maths or science or literature, then you would want to assess for that. So having these standards of this is what an assessment should necessarily gauge might also be, maybe we need to like rethink that aspect as well, right? Assessment is because there is a particular educational goal. So clarification of what that educational goal is, and then have a test or an assessment that gauges that tests for that, whether there is learning towards that end, and not a standardized thing. The issue is also with standardizing assessments that it's not necessarily gauging whether there has been learning. Yes, yes, let's talk about how Bloom's taxonomy can be used in curriculum design. It is to some extent used, but then there is a back and forth where it's largely been used for assessments, but it definitely informs, it provides clarity on what exactly are the educational goals. So the testing reveals to you what you have been teaching and whether there are domains in which you have not taught, and probably the curriculum could then be revised to that extent as well. Which is why I'm saying that they are very closely linked. Assessments, teaching strategies, and the curriculum. Usually we put assessments right at the end. I'm not making a case that you put it right at the beginning, but definitely it is not something that is an afterthought, right? So one needs to have that level of, need to integrate it to a large extent within the curriculum, within the teaching strategies itself. The curricular, extracurricular, that particular distinction, I'm not sure whether that has a bearing for our principles of assessment. Extracurricular activities have a certain educational goal, and so assessment would want to evaluate those, whether there is learning towards that particular goal, and a curricular activity may have another kind of function. So I don't think we necessarily need to integrate that. The function of a school may be to have curricular and extracurricular objectives because they want to reach a particular educational goal. But whether a single assessment can take all those into consideration, one could do it, but it's not necessarily the case each time, right? So you may have one or two assessments, but the way a higher educational institute is generally organized is around disciplines. And which is why the focus of my presentation too is on the cognitive domain, because that is also the focus. I mean, affective domain more than psychomotor domain. Affective domain is also very important, but one is assuming that at a high educational level, you would need to focus more on the cognitive processes. So Rupali is speaking about freedom to give students to select a method of evaluation as per their comfort. I would want others to comment on that. Is there a consensus on that? What do others think about it? Do we say the students can select whichever method of evaluation they want? Let's keep this statement on hold and probably revisit it. Dr. Sarla is speaking about how there may be some elite institutions which would probably have the support, and I must clarify that the Azim Premji School of Education, which is a part of TISS, is a government institution. But there may be certain kinds of, because it's a deemed university which is supported by the central government, that the level of autonomy is quite high, yes. But as I was saying, that there's also a push towards giving autonomy, whether that is entirely a beneficial thing, an advantageous thing, only we can have a debate on that. But at least in relation to whether assessments can be planned at the local decentralized level, at the level of the faculty, I think that is a very crucial kind of advantage that is being given. And so the faculty, as I said earlier, the faculty member understanding what is involved in assessment. So of course, we might sympathize with the students' plight, and we may just want to help them move to the next level. And we may plan very simple kinds of assessments so that everybody gets a pass percentage or does very well. So this is, this is one approach to assessment. But if the focus is on understanding the learning levels, then we are thinking of assessments in a different way. Once again, it is for the faculty who recognizes their particular context and the context of the students. It is for them to take a call on which assessment mode is the best. But then here we're discussing if the faculty, the teacher has a sense of this is what the discipline of geography is about, and the students at this level need to have learned about various, whatever geography requires. So if they have a very clear view of this is what a student, if they have cleared the first year of a bachelor's or first year of master's, need to know, then your assessments are trying to capture that. Okay. Yeah, okay. I'll just quickly go through the existing ones and then move on to the presentation. Yeah. Right, we can give different evaluation strategies for slow learners, advanced learners, average students, absolutely. I think this, the autonomy would help, and we would also have a clearer idea of what the classroom teaching strategies would need to address in order to address these diverse groups of students that we have. Yeah, Dr. Manasi. Yeah, I think we're coming to different suggestions about the different kinds of assessments we have, and probably we'll come back to this at the end and the last hour in particular. I think within your groups, I'm not entirely sure how the groups are formed, but within your groups, you could think through these different possibilities and reflect on what you yourself are doing as of now, and what is the scope for involving other kinds of assessments. So what I will do, and again, we'll come back to the discussions. I'm putting on hold my response to the different kinds of comments that are coming up. We will get back to that. What I'm going to do now is for us to look at the principles of assessment. And when we're saying, and here I'm focusing, as I've said earlier, on the cognitive domain. Benjamin Bloom was an associate director of the Board of Examinations at the University of Chicago. And because being part of the board of examinations, there was a realization that there are various exam papers coming which have different kinds of intentions, and then you get a faculty to explain the intention and explain also why they have used this particular these particular questions, how they have designed that exam paper. Rather than that, what he sought to do was develop a template through which one could communicate about the intention of the assessment, right? And towards that end, then also foreground the fact that the assessment is linked to the educational goal, which is why when you're talking of taxonomy, which means classification, this is a classification taxonomy of educational objectives, right? So Bloom's taxonomy, and I think this taxonomy will become a little more clear as we go along. His taxonomy included, so the educational goal would have been, and in relation to assessment, what the assessment is trying to gauge is what kind of knowledge there is, what levels of comprehension, whether there's a possibility of the student applying what they have learned, what they have comprehended. Analysis is an important educational objective. Synthesis, as in putting together the various dimensions of what they have learned, and then evaluation, right? So these 6 features are part of Bloom's taxonomy. And for Bloom, okay, let me just go over the slides that elaborate on each of this, but just to bring to your attention that these are the 6 aspects of the taxonomy. That it's not just Benjamin Bloom, it's always referred to as Bloom's taxonomy because he was the key person in that enterprise of developing this taxonomy. The book that came out, there's Bloom and a few others, including somebody called David Crethall, who goes on to revise this taxonomy. So it's actually Benjamin Bloom and his associates who come up with this taxonomy, but even the revised taxonomy is referred to as Bloom's taxonomy. And these are the 6 elements of that particular taxonomy. So let's look at when he or they say knowledge, what exactly are they referring to? And this cuts across disciplines, but each discipline will have to identify what kind of knowledge is being referred to, and the different elements in terms of analysis, what kind of analysis is expected, or in terms of synthesis, what is expected, how does evaluation take place. There would be differences in this, but as broad principles, this is what applies to all disciplines, but there would definitely be specificities in relation to each of these disciplines. Okay. So for a particular discipline, when you're saying knowledge, Bloom further, there are subsections, subcategories for each of these categories, the 6 categories that we saw. There are subcategories for each of this, which explain what is involved, except for application. Okay, so we'll look at the subcategories for these 5, and then again, if we can come back to discuss this. So so this is from design. Whether it has included these aspects, and it's also part of assessment as well as of what is being taught. So if you're looking at the assessment, can there be assessments that look at knowledge of specifics in terms of terminology, knowledge of specific facts? So this would be information related, right? Knowledge of ways and means of dealing with specifics. So this is knowledge of conventions. And this, let me just, I've put these down, and if you want, I'll come back to it. It's a lot of detail, but for you to get an overall sense, let me go forward and then come back to this. So there's knowledge of ways and means of dealing with specifics, knowledge of universals and abstractions in our field, okay? So this is the knowledge part. The next part about comprehension, once there's comprehension or understanding, then translation is possible, interpretation is possible, extrapolation is possible. So if an assessment asks for any of this, you're saying interpret a particular poem, or you're saying interpret this particular phenomenon, interpret a particular experiment, then you are asking, you are evaluating whether the student has comprehended. So the comprehension dimension is what is being evaluated when these particular terms are being used. Okay, so this is a template that's provided, which gives you an idea of what has been taught and what is expected from the learner, and at what level the learner has actually gained this particular understandings or has moved towards the educational goal. Like I said, the third one, application does not have any subcategories. So if you move to the fourth one, when there is analysis, and again, this is very discipline specific, it could be analysis of elements, analysis of relationships, analysis of organizational principle. A student or a learner would need to know at these different levels. Now, particular disciplines, probably analysis of organizational principles may not be as important, right? But analysis of relationships, so even if you're looking at mathematics, analysis of relationship between different kinds of paradigms or different theories or different numbers itself could be extremely important. So it's just, again, a question of how you understand or define relationships. Okay, so that is the analysis part of it. The fifth aspect or fifth category is synthesis, which is production of a unique communication. So does your assessment, when your assessment asks for a synthesis, whether you're asking for a synthesis, that's another thing that you may want to reflect on. But if it does ask for a synthesis, it would be asking for the production of a plan, production of a unique communication. These are Bloom's terms, so it's directly taken from his work, but there would be probably a scope for further elaborating and clarifying this. Okay, so this is synthesis. And then the student or the learner should also be able to evaluate within a discipline. So evaluation in terms of internal evidence, for instance, when a student is looking at doing literature review, then they are evaluating in terms of evidence within that domain itself, but there could be judgments coming from external criteria. So for instance, there may be evidence coming in from when you're saying external criteria, for instance, if you're applying the criteria of sciences to social sciences or vice versa, or of social sciences to humanities, then that would be judgment in terms of external criteria. So a learner would need to also realize that there are some internal criteria through which you can evaluate. So a knowledge and understanding of those criteria is extremely important. Otherwise, the evaluation makes no sense. There has to be internal consistency as well as an awareness of the external criteria. So there should be knowledge of these in order to be able to evaluate. So when you're testing, when you're evaluating a learner's progress, whether this would be, according to Bloom, the highest level of learning. So another thing about Bloom's taxonomy is that it is hierarchical. Okay, so each of knowledge, so it is pyramidal, in which evaluation is at the highest level, requiring a higher order of thinking. Synthesis is next, analysis is next, and at the bottom, so if you have a pyramidal structure, at the bottom is knowledge, then there's comprehension, and knowledge is of different kinds. Then there's application analysis. So this goes from basic to the higher levels. So if, according to Bloom, to be able to evaluate was the highest kind of function that a learner would need to achieve. And in order for a student to make meaningful evaluation, there would have to be a lot of inputs, and each of this stage would rely on the previous one. There would be no comprehension without knowledge. There could not be application without comprehension and knowledge. Analysis would not be possible without these. So that's how it goes. Each stage presumes the previous one. Let me just a few comments. Yeah, I think there are a few questions, but let me first complete these slides and then get back to some of the comments that are being made. And in relation to Bloom's principles itself, if there are any immediate questions, it's not clear, I think I could address them right away and then get back to the practical difficulties that we may have when we are trying to use this taxonomy. Okay, so just to again stay with this for a few minutes. This is Bloom's original taxonomy in 1956. This was the first one on the cognitive domain. In 1964, if I'm not mistaken, there was a second handbook which focused on the affective domain. And then in 1975, there was more work on the psychomotor domain. But what is most discussed is the cognitive domain. Increasingly now we are speaking of the affective domain, but otherwise it's the cognitive domain that has required a lot of attention. Okay, so in 2001, this is in 45 years after the original taxonomy was published. The work for the original taxonomy actually began in the 1940s, 49. It was published in 1956, and in 2001, the taxonomy was revised. And it was revised because so the revision was largely taken up by the name I referred to earlier, Krathwohl. He was one of the persons involved in the initial exercise as well, the original taxonomy. And in the revision, if you saw what knowledge dimension has, there are several aspects to it, okay? So there is knowledge of specifics, knowledge of ways and means of dealing with specifics, knowledge of universals and abstractions. So there are these different kinds of knowledges. And if you look at the other aspects, comprehension, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, Krathwohl's argument was that, okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth elements are actually verbs. They are, knowledge has the verb and the noun part. So basically that there is knowledge, which is mostly in the noun form, but comprehension is about to comprehend, to apply, to analyze, to synthesize, to evaluate. These are the cognitive processes. So cognition as in the process by which understanding is attained through thought or experience or use of senses. This would be the understanding of cognition. So cognition is attained through, there are processes, processes through which, processes connected with cognition, or the cognitive processes which involve comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. So what Krathwohl did was to separate out the cognitive processes from the knowledge dimension. From the knowledge part, he separated out these, but there's also the verb form of knowledge, which is largely, he put it as remember. Okay, because most of our assessments are about memory recall, right? So different kinds of questions that we are asking are largely about, do we have the information? Do we remember the information? That information has to be reproduced. So there is that dimension also to knowledge, which he put down as one of the verbs. And let's just look at his revision of the taxonomy. Knowledge dimensions, so the 4 knowledge dimensions that he represented, which is factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, and metacognitive knowledge. Okay. Let me just, so Krathwohl is mapping on to, so it might seem like this is just a theoretical discussion, but what I have found in my own experience is that it does give you a lot of scope for thinking about the kinds of assessments that one designs. Okay, so considerations of where the student is, whether they should pass or not pass, that is one part of it. So I'm bracketing that for now and saying that if one wants to assess in order to understand the students' learning, then there are these aspects to it. So when you're speaking about knowledge of specifics, Krathwohl translates it as factual knowledge. So of specific facts or terminology or information. So this is knowledge of facts, which is factual knowledge. Knowledge of ways and means of dealing with specifics is about, he translates that as procedural knowledge, how to do something. Okay, what is the knowledge about the process that has to be followed? So there is that knowledge as well. So one realizes there are different things, different aspects of knowledge that there is, as Krathwohl has pointed out, and Bloom's taxonomy already has it. He gives it a more specific name, which is factual knowledge, procedural knowledge. This is conceptual knowledge. So there are three kinds of knowledges that Bloom's original taxonomy already speaks about. And to that, Krathwohl adds the metacognitive knowledge. So there are four kinds of knowledges that Krathwohl lists in his knowledge dimension in the taxonomy. Okay. So there is factual knowledge, which is still these things. Conceptual knowledge, which is knowledge of classifications, categories, knowledge of principles and generalizations, knowledge of theories, models, structures, and understanding the relationships between these different models, theories, structures. So all that would be conceptual knowledge. There's procedural knowledge. Okay? Knowledge of how to take a particular process forward or what procedure to be followed, that would be procedural knowledge. Metacognitive knowledge is, once again, the highest form of knowledge, where the learner knows how they know, right? Be a step on cognitive processes itself, that the student understands procedure, of course, maybe just to give you an example, understands what the process is, but understands also his or her own understanding of that process and how they're arriving at that particular knowledge. So that is a step above all the other knowledges and understanding of the cognitive knowledges itself. Yeah, there is this question which I was trying to address also. What is the importance of Bloom's taxonomy for the assessment and strategies of cognitive learning? So our understanding, our recognition that there are these different dimensions to knowledge is one part of it. We do not differentiate. For instance, we are teaching chemistry. Are we teaching procedural knowledge? Are we teaching conceptual knowledge or factual information? Most often, we are probably doing all of these, right? But to differentiate that, to recognize that from factual knowledge, the student also needs to move to that procedural knowledge or needs to move to metacognitive knowledge. And what are the steps that are required for that? And what are the steps that are required is what comes across in the cognitive process dimension, right? How does the student learn gain these different kinds of knowledges? So if our educational objective is that the student should attain factual knowledge, attain conceptual knowledge. For instance, you might decide that for your particular discipline, there are no concepts. It's not necessary to have, for the student to learn to have conceptual knowledge. You could skip that particular step and focus on some other step. But very often, what studies have found is that our curriculum, our teaching stops at the factual knowledge. We do not move on to the other knowledge dimensions. We do not necessarily reach that. And I'll just show you a template where you can map that. So that would be the main contribution of Bloom's taxonomy, both for curriculum design, for learning strategies, and for assessment. Okay? And this revised taxonomy kind of refines Bloom's taxonomy further. Okay, so we can just go ahead and do what we're doing and believe that this is the best way of teaching. It has been done for so long. We have been successful. Our students love us. But the question that we're asking is not so much whether we're a popular teacher, whether we are seen as a lenient teacher, a kind teacher, but whether there has been learning for the student. So this is what an assessment, my focus here is on this dimension rather than the other dimensions of our teaching lives. So there would be other aspects through which one can probably become all of that. But if we are trying to see whether our teaching has been effective, that learning has been, that the student has learned, how do we assess that they have learned? This is a very difficult question, right? Because learning, you do not, so we are talking about objectivity. How do we know, for instance, that objectively the student has learned? And whether we're interested, so the objective parts, when you're asking objective questions, they're always about factual knowledge, right? Is there any other way you can have objective questions? So multiple choice questions, you're giving 4 or 5 options and asking them to choose one correct one, which is the objective one, right? Is that conceptual knowledge? Is that procedural knowledge? Or is that just information that it's not something that the student has arrived at? So it could be, so if you're asking them to define something, what kind of knowledge is that? If you're asking them to interpret something, what have they learned? So that's what Bloom's taxonomy is trying to draw your attention to. Okay, so let me just complete this part and then get back to the discussion again. So what cognitive processes are involved in gaining factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, metacognitive knowledge? The cognitive elements are, and these, if you'll see here, are mostly verbs instead of knowledge, talking of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing. Earlier, the original taxonomy had evaluation as the highest order of thinking, but in the revised taxonomy, creating is regarded as the highest order of thinking. So these first 3 are lower order thinking abilities. They're simple, they're basic, they're essential. But these higher order thinking abilities build on those lower order thinking abilities. And then, yeah, so that is where one can aim towards going, one can aim to go towards these higher order thinking abilities or more complex kinds of thinking that a student is capable of. And has our teaching, has our curriculum, has our assessment gauged whether they are, which of these orders of thinking have they actually grasped? Where are they at? So the assessment is what enables you to get to an understanding of that. So this is actually the revised taxonomy, which also goes under the name of Bloom's taxonomy. So this is the pyramid that I was referring to. And here you have, the focus is largely on the cognitive processes. Because our assessments, when they ask, they say, analyze something, or they do not say remember, but then they would say define or list out or state, which is just bringing in factual knowledge, right? When they're asking you to interpret or translate or classify, identify, locate, recognize, that requires a certain level of understanding. So what is the particular task that you have given that, and what is the student, which of these cognitive processes is the student required to apply? What cognitive process is initiated when you give a particular assessment? and ask them to do a certain thing. So are you enhancing the evaluative ability of the student when you ask them to, for instance, select a particular, or you give an essay and ask them to critique it, or you ask them to explain and justify whether they agree with a particular theory or they would want to revise it, or are they, so if they do it themselves, then they're evaluating. If you're asking them, is there a further revision? So if I were to say, who revised Bloom's taxonomy, then you say Krathol. So that is like at the very basic order of thinking, it's memory recall. So you say Krathol, right? How was it revised is also memory recall. Creating is, if you were to give a task where you say, if the student is asked, for instance, to revise the revised taxonomy and provide justification for doing that, then they would need to necessarily be, so we spoke about what is required, knowledge of internal criteria, external criteria. So creation would require all of this in order to produce some kind of further revision of this particular taxonomy, right? So this is where the taxonomy comes, it becomes so useful if we do want to use it. And yeah, so I just want to bring up something else. So this I've left blank because I wanted to go back to the, I couldn't fit that particular table. So I'll just share that template and then we could go in for a discussion. Just a minute.
Ma'am, would you like to go for questions now from the participants?
I just want to show this one template and then I'll, yeah, I just want to, yeah, this one, not this one, sorry, this is the effective domain, this one. Can you see this?
Yes, it is visible, yeah, pretty much.
So this is what I was referring to. Krathol's revision of Bloom's taxonomy makes it into a two-dimensional figure. So you have the knowledge dimension on the one side and you have the cognitive process dimension on the other side. And what you have here, marked here is for yourself, you could see your particular assessment task. Is it, at which level is it pitched? Is it asking you to understand factual knowledge? Or is it asking you to create something that also involves, so the particular, this is a reading that I've shared with you. So if you want to go back to it, it's a reference to a particular assignment given by a school teacher. And then one is looking at what has been mapped. So there are several parts to this which have not been evaluated. So, so this is another example of that table where you say, okay, the memory recall or the remembering part is important, but there is also in the assignment one part that has asked the students to create, but you can see the gaps as well. So nowhere has the assignment asked them to apply or analyze. Not that it is important you fill this up entirely. It's just a question of understanding what your particular, what are you asking for? So whether it's a group discussion or it is any kind of innovative assessment, what exactly is the innovation aiming for? So that is where I want to leave you with. And then yes, we could go back to the questions now.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Rekha Papu. It was a wonderful session, truly interactive. We can see that the chat box is full of comments and queries since you addressed the very crux of education, assessment and evaluation. May I request the participants now to ask questions? Already there are some questions in the chat box. So, ma'am, would you require help of Professor Pingesan?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you very much, madam, for rather enlightening talk. Many of us over here from the autonomous colleges. Recently, we have been interested in the outcomes, aligning these outcomes with the assessment methods. Would you, tell us the best possible way to, summarize writing down the outcomes and then aligning it with evaluation? How can we look into the POCO attainments for the benefit of all over here?
Right. So I thought I was doing that in the sense that if your educational goals are clear and you're saying your educational goals you're representing in terms of your outcomes. If you could give me an example of what, of one of the outcomes, for instance, that you have, then we could look back at what kind of content material you'd want to use. And what kinds of teaching, and then what kinds of assessments that can bring you to that particular outcome. So it is definitely, I mean, this entire, the assessments are in themselves not outcomes. Whatever you get from the assessments will not be the outcomes, but will lead you to those outcomes. And that's where the formative and the summative become very important, because it's rare that you will directly in one assessment reach the outcome that you have in mind. So
I'll continue this question
yeah.
In the light that most of the college teachers, we are not trained teachers in that sense, that we have not been taught what is expected in B.Ed or what is expected in M.Ed. So even for most of us, Bloom's taxonomy is sometimes new. And even drafting out those action verbs, taking us to the outcomes is new. The mapping of POs and COs is also new. And finally, the attainment is new. So that's why my interest was to
and COs?
The program outcomes and the course outcomes.
Okay.
Yeah. So finally, what we expect is to map them and associate it with attainment of those outcomes also. So we, as a non-trained set of teachers, I would say non-trained set of teachers, find it really difficult, starting from jotting down the outcomes and finally looking into attainments of those outcomes. So can you, for benefit of all of us, simplify it a bit so that everyone does it?
Firstly, I must say, Professor Pingley, that all of us in the higher education sector are not trained teachers. We hold a doctorate degree and then are hired for this. Even those who've gone through B.Ed and M.Ed, they are trained to teach school children. Training to teach adults is not something that's available to us, which is why faculty development programs, orientations, I mean, these are just quick substitutes for long-term training. Having said that, I must also say that I'm not, I read about it, but experientially, I'm not sure of how the outcome, what you're referring to as POCOs, how one works towards that. But I could work with you all if you explained some more of what that is. But you're right in saying that we may not, each of us may not be able to spend as much time on Bloom's taxonomy. Actually, it's not very, it looks daunting because it is a taxonomy and there are several aspects to it. Even if one doesn't go very deep into it, just looking at that template and so if the outcome also, if one is able to assess at what level the outcome is. So if the outcome, if you can again give me an example, if the outcome is about factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, or so this Bloom's taxonomy, the reason that it has been with us for so many years is because it has managed to capture some of the basic principles and they can be applied to our context quite well. So I would say that even this effort to get to certain program outcome, which is basically an objective, right? So we are talking of educational objectives and educational goals. That when you're saying outcome, the emphasis of the administration and policymakers, I mean, increasingly this is the trend that the outcome should be measurable, right? This Bloom's taxonomy is not so much about measuring, but it can help one revise those, that emphasis on measurement itself. Because if you, you can in fact get to those, if one is defining those outcomes as educational aims and goals, the measurables can be in terms of learning and then the capturing of that learning through the different assessment modes. Right?
Thank you, ma'am. I can see in the chat box, as soon as I uttered those words, POs and COs, everybody has been touched and they have started talking about it. There's a question from Dr. Mahadev Gawane from Latur. Ma'am, please elaborate metacognitive knowledge assessment.
Yeah. I'll come back to that, or I'll take a few questions together, which can take me back to the screen. So yes, this is something that, because there are certain terms through which metacognition is a process by which a learner recognizes and understands the highest level of knowledge where one is aware of one's processes of thinking. So the metacognitive kind of knowledge assessment would be asking for process description. So if you're saying create something and also explain the process of creating of that is a metacognitive activity where you are, where the student or the learner is coming up. Creation could also be in terms of writing a research dissertation. One is not speaking only of art kind of creation. So you're speaking of creating musical compositions, for instance. That's one example given. But it is also, for instance, original research. So you are creating or creating a particular theory or revising something and creating a new kind of document or creating a policy. So when one is doing that, to be able to explain the different steps one has followed and the justification for that. So the metacognitive process will actually go from one end of the cognitive process to the other. It will involve, in most cases, all the aspects of remembering, comprehending, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and then creating, right? So a task that can give all of a task that has all these elements would be a metacognitive kind of assessment.
Thank you, ma'am. This is a question from Mr. Sitaram Kavade, who is interested in looking into the association of e-learning with respect to the Bloom's taxonomy. How can Bloom's taxonomy be seen in the light of the e-learning which is going on right now?
I mean, to the extent that one is has these aspects of learning objectives, of teaching strategies. So it is basically an examination or an exploration of whether some aspects that one has sought to cover have been covered. So even through the e-learning, I think if one is paying attention to what kinds of knowledge is the e-learning focusing on. So to that extent, I don't see that it's necessarily, it makes a huge difference that it is e-learning, or as long as one is aware of what exactly through this particular modality one is trying to achieve.
And then thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ishita Ghoshal wants to ask, how do we address heterogeneity in students while devising assessments that carry substantial weightage? And I'll supplement this question with Dr. Subhash G. Shinde's question, where firstly he's complimenting you for a wonderful presentation, and then he continues asking you that due to big numbers in class, it's quite difficult to give personal attention towards the students while assessing them. What would be your advice to deal with this problem?
Yeah, so this really is a very difficult, I mean, I think all of us have experiences, either large classes and also large and diverse classes. And I think there have already been these concerns about say slow learners or learners who do not have cultural capital, who are probably first generation learners. So we do have those kinds of issues definitely. And it would be extremely useful to devise, I mean, we have two options, either devise individualized kinds of assessments, but then in practical terms, it's very difficult to set, for instance, 50 question paper, 50 assessment tasks, or to have a single assessment that that you have a sense of which can be approached by the student, and then you understand at what level the student is addressing that particular task. So if they're giving you only information, whereas your task has already also been about, to some extent, analysis, you get a sense of the student being at that basic learning level, right? Where it's only about remembering. And if one can urge them to move to the next level. So this is also the use of Bloom's taxonomy, that you have a sense that there is a learning trajectory, that one moves from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. And your assessment task in the formative assessment, the first formative assessment, you could, I mean, there is of course, you can decide, you would directly ask them to create something in which there would be some elements of remembering, or your initial basic assessment is, the formative assessment is helping them have that information for themselves. So that would be one part. But then again, if I can go back to share, I also wanted to speak about rubrics, which can to us an extent help us give feedback. I mean, in a large class, it's very difficult for us to give individual feedback. To talk to each one of them, if we can speak to the student and explain where the gaps are, that would be great. If one cannot do that, to give written comments is the next best step. But even that could be time consuming and may not be so easy to handle. The next best thing would be having a rubric, which takes into account these different, and I'll just show you a template for a rubric and what I mean by a rubric. I'll just come to that. So, Professor Pinkley, if you can remind me about that, but should we go on to the other questions?
All right, surely I'll remind you. Just for everyone to know, Professor Sybil Thomas is with us also.
Okay.
If she can unmute and share her thoughts on this, that would also do. Welcome, Thomas, ma'am.
Yeah. No.
You can share your inputs
Dr.
as well.
Rekha has been very skillfully navigating through this whole difficult and yet contentious area of assessment. But I think what ma'am had already shown us in terms of a chart where the mapping was an example from the paper, where you have the mapping of the domains of knowledge on one hand, I think on the left hand side. On top, if you would like, I don't know how many of you have gone through the UGC quality manual that they have recently come out, with the quality manual. So there again, they put in something similar in that form, where they put one side is our levels of learning, that would be our objectives that we want to attain. On the other hand, when we talk, we can put in over here would be the kind of questions, the methods of instructions, like, I don't know, ma'am, Rekha ma'am, is that one you had displayed that, correct? So that also could be the way in which we can map the kind of the objective with the assessment. Yeah. So if you're saying question in your assessment with regard to project work, with regard to, you may have 4 or 5 different ways of assessment for a particular student, for a particular course. So you could also map those assessment dealing with the different domains of learning. That whole construction of a rubric is nothing but, which ma'am had explained, is mapping of the objectives with assessment. You can choose to use it to widen the, instead of having only 2 like axis of X and Y, you could have one more aspect which you would want to add in terms of methods, mapping the procedures, the project objectives and the assessment. Yeah. So it's all about looking for commonality from the objective to the assessment practice. How do we connect the common thread? And I think what UGC expects of you, of us all, is creating those kind of rubrics or those kind of grid diagrams before we begin for the course, or while we construct our courses at autonomous colleges, where we are able to see relationship between every aspect of the components of a curriculum. Yeah. So that's what I think. And we had begun by saying curriculum objective, the broader ones, Then we looked at program objectives. So it could be the BCom program, the BA program. Then we saw course objectives. And now each of these parts would have its own evaluation. And therefore, we look at it against the taxonomy which Madam had displayed. And I think, Rekha ma'am, it will be very helpful even later as she would show us about the rubric also for creation. Now, I think a question that was missed out is extrapolation a part of metacognition? Rekha ma'am, your take on that?
No, extrapolation is not metacognitive. Extrapolation is more a simple order, kind of more basic order thinking. It comes with the comprehension that, and it could be taken to application and analysis, but not necessarily metacognitive thinking.
So it could begin probably regulation.
Apply. We don't need to use Bloom's taxonomy in that very technical sense, but to recognize that there are different orders of thinking and that we do not want to stay at the most basic or the simple, and that each discipline has calls for certain kinds of faculties of thinking, and we would need to recognize that certain disciplines will emphasize certain kinds of thinking and certain other disciplines will emphasize other kinds of thinking. So to identify what is our particular discipline emphasizing and how do we then ensure that a student or the learner has got that part of it. That would be the key thing. Yeah, so there's a question about the POs and COs again, and I can see that that is of concern, but let me just quickly show, and then I think Professor Sibel and Professor Pingle can again go back to this particular concern. I'm just assuming that there was also an earlier question about how do we do it at TISS. So I'll just show this. It is assignment, a formative assessment assignment that I had given for a course on educational policy that I teach. And I thought I'll just share it with you. It's not the best model, but just to draw attention to a few aspects of assessment, which is about, which one hopes will also be able to reach diverse learners and also address this thing about giving feedback. So let me just go back to that. Yeah, so this is a rubric. I won't go into this. Okay, sorry, this is the presentation. I'll come to the, yeah. I just need, give me a minute. I'm looking for that. Yeah, sorry, I didn't have this up. Yeah, so this is the assignment. So this would be the rubric. But I think you would get an understanding of the rubric if you got a sense of what the task itself is. So one part is the particular task. And so this is about, basically I wanted the students to be able to look at existing data, different data sources on education, and then look at their particular state. So to some extent, this is also about learning the affective domain that you're able to connect. Affective domain is about thought. So there was a question also about how do we have assessments that take into consideration the affective dimension, affective as in emotions, thoughts, values. So there is a certain identification with one's own state or province. So I was asking the student to select a particular state. They could do, they could select whichever state they belong to. Then look at how that particular state, how does it rank in relation to the other states in terms of literacy figures and There are many other parameters for education. So if they could look at that and comment on it. So I also give guidelines for how they should write their assignment. And this is mostly explained in the class. But what I want to draw your attention to is this particular rubric. So this would be the rubric. I have this as a template, and for each student, I then mark another column where I'm giving them the actual scores. So this is the maximum marks. This particular assignment is carries 25% weightage. So it's 10 to 25 marks. And through this, I'm hoping they will get a sense of what is required of them. And then I give the actual score. And I generally write a few lines also about what they have missed out. But looking at their marks too, they would get a sense of what they may not have covered. So mostly I find that they are not looking at secondary sources. It's part of the guidelines, but you also find that they may not be doing this. This does not, as I was saying, if you're looking at this rubric, it doesn't map on to Bloom's taxonomy in a direct way. It has to some extent informed. One can do much better, but I just thought I would share with you the possibility of developing rubrics. So, I mean, somebody spoke about objective assessment. So this is another way you can be both objective and you're also assessing each individual student. So if you know where the student's background is, then some of them write very insightful comments from personal experience. Now that could also be accepted by you. So it depends on how you want to pitch it, and just to make the task of providing feedback, make sure that there is feedback for every student, but not necessarily one that takes up a lot of your time. A rubric is one possible way of doing it. Yeah, I just wanted to share that. I think there are questions about, again, the course object outcomes, is it? Outcomes and program outcomes. Anything further, Sybil?
So if there are no more questions, then can we head over to the activity part of it, ma'am? Sybil, ma'am?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Rekha, ma'am, we have a Google Doc that we will share today with the participants. Okay. And we have jotted down a couple of questions. Would you like to add any further questions to it? I will just share the Google Doc with you to show you if you would really like to add something to this. If you can see, these are the usual questions that we ask them every day. List 2 or more key learnings from today's session, and list 2 or more themes you would like to explore further. So apart from this, based on your session today, would you like to add any further questions?
Right, I would like them to the second question, not so much list as reflect on, because again, listing would be the recall part of it. So I would say if they could maybe reflect and then even go on to create another assessment for their course. So this is just as an exercise. Given the particular college structure, they may or may not be able to use it, but just to get a sense of when one is designing an assessment task, what does one have in mind, right? Usually one is exploring the content part of it, which is fine, but the subject matter or the content of that particular discipline, what aspect of it is one exploring. So yeah, just to make it simple, I would say that reflect on 1 or 2 of the assessments that you provide for your course. Because there is this interest or concern about the outcomes. to see to this question that actually Professor Pingle, you're asking me if the participants could answer about how whether their assessments are connected to achieving, whether they do lead to reaching the outcomes or ensuring the outcomes, of course, and the program. Sure, Dr. Shabib, I would be happy to reflect with all of you about the rubric.
Yeah,
Jyoti, maybe about not so much in your college as in the course that you are teaching. I think that would be
right. So how if it goes like, the one question, whether the present assessment method in your course lead to attainments of POCO, and then reflect on one or two assessment from today's session, and reflect or create one or more themes you would like to explore further. Is it all okay now?
No, the reflect on one or two assessments from today's session. I have no assessment, so it is from the course the faculty is teaching.
Jyoti ma'am, if you can follow and correct, I guess, this second one.
Reflect on one or two assessments that you have given as part of your course. That's what I meant here.
From your course.
Dr. Shabib wanted to share a rubric.
All right. So Jyoti ma'am, in the background, if you can edit the sheet. In the meanwhile, I'll allow Dr. Shabir to share the file. Is it okay, Jyoti ma'am?
It should be okay. Jyoti, just stop screen share.
So I'm stopping the screen share here, and I'll allow Shabir sir to share. Shabir sir, Shabib sir, yes. If you can share the rubric that you are having here. You have been allowed screen sharing now. This was the whole idea of coming together. There are so many autonomous colleges, and sharing their best practices or the things they are doing was the idea, and that's what we are doing right now. Thank you, Shabib sir. If you can zoom it a bit, maybe. Yeah. Much better, sir. Thank you.
Construction of
I'll also allow you to unmute, sir.
Is this it, or do you need to scroll down?
Shabib, sir, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Good afternoon, madam, and thank you for giving the consent to share it on the screen. Am I audible to all?
Yes.
You are, sir.
Yes. Basically, my subject is microbiology. So based on the experiments which we have been learning, and we are still learning how to construct a better and comprehensive rubric. It was just for the sake of internal assessment, the step for the internal assessment for TY-BSc microbiology students. The topic is based on the recombinant DNA technology. They were told to construct a mind map, and by using the different apps required for that, they were supposed to make it and upload on the Google Classroom before a deadline. And I just tried to create. I still would like to explore further what would be a better way of first I wanted to have just a simple picture, because now since we had this pandemic situation, I just gave some sort of relaxation that if they are not able to have some more sibling topics, because in certain cases the content is limited, so they may not have more number of sibling topics. I just tried to give some sort of some sort of relaxation for them. And not only for a particular app which I shared, I gave the freedom to construct with the help of PowerPoint, MindMaster, Mind Map. There are different apps available.
Okay.
And this is just I tried. Ma'am, could you please share?
Yeah, if, I could just comment on this. Is that okay? One thing I would say, Dr. Shabib, is that I think the idea what the assessment you're giving, I find it very interesting, and I think it would be very useful for the way you described it for whatever you're trying to gauge. Just one part of it that I would think that any description of an assignment should be as clear as possible. Now, most often we think that written assignment or we just orally indicate to the students whatever we want them to do, but it's always best to have it very clearly laid out, all aspects.
Madam, like this is just the rubric. Actually, the main notice which was shared with the students that had all the instructions. With your permission, can I share that page? Because even that is one notice for the intern.
And best if they're all together. See, I'm saying this only one is because students only 2 days or few days before they have to submit the assignment, they are coming back to the assignment. So they would need all of that information at one place. That would be one reason. The other is that if somebody else were to be teaching this course, they would benefit greatly from the kind of assessment that you have thought about. For them, it would be really useful.
Yeah, I'll just share that, madam. Just a moment. There is one more page. Yeah. Notice. Is this page visible, madam?
Yes, yes.
Like this was the notice actually given before the date on the Google Classroom.
Okay.
So it is about semester 6 course 1 to construct a mind map on the topic allotted and submit on or before this date. Instructions were given like how to construct, and there was some link shared with them so that the students know how to construct, because some of them like knew it, but some of them were like not knowing it. So then they were told to like see those videos, try to construct and make a PDF version of that and then upload. And these were the topics allotted roll number wise.
I see. Okay. Okay, fine. Yeah, this is clear enough. About the rubric, I think you could just move that the marks could be on one axis and the parameters could be on another axis.
Okay, yeah, okay, okay.
It's always difficult in relation to marks. If you say, for instance, I think I noticed something about a range, right? So it's always best to say this will be the maximum score. That's my sense. I don't know what your experience has been. So the maximum cutoff is 9 marks rather than say 7 to 9. If you can break it up that way, I think there would be less controversies.
Okay.
Because how would you then explain? I mean, of course, it's useful to have clarity for ourselves about when do we give 5.5 and when do we give 6.5. What is
because madam, because that is sometimes always a difficult thing, because if the student does not exactly fit into giving a score in the decimal form, it is sometimes difficult because that may not justify the particular efforts which the student may have taken. So it is either 6, either 7. But if we are trying to, because sometimes it really becomes difficult, because of that, I thought maybe rubric will give the students some sense that what they are actually expected, because many times they may not know what is expected.
I also find it useful. So I would agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, madam.
Yeah. Dr. Anuja is talking about the confusion with the POs and COs with the exam. So sorry, I'm not able to address that directly. I would need more familiarity with it. Yeah.
No. So I really don't, with POs, COs and assessment, what are your, this is open to the participants, please respond so that we are able to address this, or maybe even take this tomorrow itself, that So what do you want to see exactly? Do you want to see that how do you map it in a form of a rubric is what you all are wanting to see that? Or how does it correspond to each other and how do we look for a common thread? Is that what you're looking for?
I think to be very specific, let me come down to it. There's a question in NAC manual for all the affiliated colleges as well as autonomous colleges, that whether the program outcomes, program specific outcomes and course outcomes for all the courses and the programs have been defined and uploaded on their institutional website is one. And the second supplementary question they ask is, if the program outcomes or the course outcomes have been defined, how does the institution ensures that the program outcomes, or how does the institution, what mechanism they are having to look after the attainment of the program outcomes or the course outcomes? And as I said, most of us, we are not trained in education. That's why we start from writing down the course outcomes itself and studying, going through the Bloom's taxonomy and action verbs, etc. So because this question has appeared suddenly in the NAC manual, everybody is concerned about it.
Yeah. So would it help now? Is it something that you all are looking for where you will see how to do it, or it is done? Is that what you all are looking for? So
sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Frankly speaking, a little bit on how to technically write course outcomes using Bloom taxonomy, a little bit, because at this level, probably we should understand how to go about it. But more emphasis on how would we map the POs, the program outcomes, with the course outcomes. And lastly, how do we see that the outcomes have been attained by the students? Maybe through rubrics,
through a particular rubric is what you're looking for. If you permit me to share the screen, is it something so that we can probably take this up, which is given in your quality manual of UGC itself? Can I just share screen?
Ma'am, you can.
I can. So is this something I'm just wondering that you all are looking for? Is it visible?
It is visible. Probably you just need to
increase the percentage.
Or bring down the left column of navigation. It is much visible now. Thank you.
So this is how they are talking of it in their handbook. This is what you want, like learning outcome. Then if this is the strategy for this learning outcome, therefore what are the assessment techniques that you are using? And therefore what are they have said that you could specify the sample assessments with that. So do you want an exercise like this to be done?
Yes.
That how do you write this, remember, understand, apply, therefore which unit? So now I understood. Rekha ma'am, I think as a part of their NAC requirement, they are expected to construct something like this and justify that this is mindfully done in the content and in the curriculum transaction. So
see, madam, suddenly in the chat box, people are happy now.
So this is what so how do we attain this is when we write, like probably what I would write as a principal, we would write is, we construct rubrics at the beginning of the year. Each teacher prepares their individual plans. Then we attach these sample plans. And then we say that how each of these 4 components relate to one another through something like this. So if you want something, probably only thing is this is very mechanistic, in the sense that we give you one kind of a box and we tell you, chalo, fill here. But if that is the the requirement to be fulfilled, so it's something that we could look at. Yes,
what most of us are doing is we have gone through writing that exercise of writing down the outcomes. But now when we are setting up the question papers, we want our evaluation method to be aligned with those outcomes, because then only we'll be able to see whether they have been attained or not.
Correct.
So this probably will definitely help the matrix that you are giving.
So if 1 or 2 of you who have worked on the outcome and content can share that with us, we probably would use that as a discussion. I'll have to go back and discuss with the team. We'll use this probably as a discussion method to see how you all could go that further. Rekha ma'am has also been right through in the planning process for this workshop. So what do you think, Rekha ma'am?
I would think that using Bloom's taxonomy directly in this manner is rather a mechanistic thing to come to program outcomes and course outcomes. For instance, again, I think we would need to take a particular subject. So if it is MSc biotechnology, then the learning outcomes would be related to the particular discipline or microbiology or biotechnology. You see what is the, you have a sense of like, do they move? Or let me say, if you, I mean, given my background as literature, if I were to say that the learning outcome for the first year students is that they should know 19th century British literature, American literature. So those are the broad learning outcomes, and the course specific outcomes would then zero in on, would name which particular authors or critics or works, and then you talk about what kind of teaching learning activity that one would use. Would you use a text or a film or an experiment, a demonstration, an outside lecturer, a series of lectures, or you would have experiential learning? So those would be the process through which you get to those outcomes, and then the assessment for each of them.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very rightly said. Even I thought this was very like right through this session. Now, what we have been dealing with you all, friends, is we are helping you to form or look at different ways to inform curriculum. But now you could look like, as ma'am rightly said, draw up like irrespective of following, knowledge, understanding in its sequence. Draw up some objectives for us, and probably you can contact sir if 5 of you would want to volunteer to share some of the objectives and content that you have done. We could brainstorm in groups as to how you can see possibly assessment to match that. How can you probably see teaching learnings could reach that? Is that doable, Rekha, madam?
Yeah. If we could comment on a few, and then other faculty could use it as a model or revise it or whatever it is. That I think is.
That should be something that take up. So, Pingle sir, requesting you on urgent basis to, if they can write to you, and if you can share, and tomorrow morning in our discussion meeting, we could probably take this up before we come back to them in the afternoon or evening.
Sure.
For us to get back. I'm not sure we'll be able to...
No, at least if we can see in the practicum part, if they can display and somebody could be there to comment and give ideas. Like you rightly said, if they show theirs, then we can also give ideas and see how they can, the rest of them could look at it in terms of...
I think Dr. Poonam Deshpande from Ferguson College, Pune, she is happy to volunteer. We already had Dr. Shabib sir with us. So yes, couple of names are there, and a few more can join in, that would be great.
Yeah. So I think that will be something then which we'll be able to look at the COPOs and this and comment as you present and see how you progressively look at this.
Dr. Anita Goswami from Bandodkar College, Thane, she is also willing to join in.
And Dr. Ishita, yeah. So you take that down, sir, and we'll accordingly think of how.
All right,
and
so
names and also so that we can, if need be, you can talk to them before the presentation. Some guidelines we will also come up with as to what they should really present for us to comment. Correct, Rekha, madam?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what, ma'am, UGC has given them and requires of them to create.
Okay.
They may not create it in this order. Like we may tell them to look at what their discipline stands for and take, maybe you may not have a remember for all at all. You may just have directly understanding or level or an application level or an analysis level. That's what you may have directly. But, and then how do you go about seeing that all these correspond to each other? Okay. Glad. So at least we understand.
The requirement, yeah.
The requirement is.
Thank you, ma'am. How do we go about, ma'am? Shall we continue with the exercise that we had given yesterday? Some of the presentations were left.
Yeah, as well as today's reflections. So the Google Doc is created, sir. So Jyoti would share the link in each of the group, like ma'am had talked about reflecting on some assessment practice, what more need. Jyoti, could you share that Google link to us? So in the groups again, we would discuss and reflect on all that we had been discussing today. And like yesterday, we would key it in then and there in the Google document group wise, and we would come back for the Pingle sir at what time, because we need 5 presentations of yesterday to be completed today.
Exactly. I mean, let us give only 2 to 3 minutes for presentation of yesterday's exercise, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Each one of them. So we had finished 3 and some 6 or 7 are remaining. So around 20 minutes. And then we meet back around, say, 5:30 and give an exercise. That will be pretty less then.
So what's the time now? We are at 5.
It's around 5 now.
So can we, you think that reflection, how much time are you saying?
I guess 15 minutes will be enough, right?
Yeah.
More than enough.
Okay.
And the exercise we left yesterday will give 2 minutes to each group, maybe for today only.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Yes.
So maybe we can start with the presentation of yesterday's stuff. And in the meanwhile, the Google Doc link for today's exercise I'm sharing. So once the groups are made, then only start filling it up. Like, yesterday's thing. Yes, the link for today's exercise is shared in the chat box. You will only write it down once you are, moved into the breakout rooms. Don't start attempting anything as of now. Now I'm sharing the screen, the Google Doc that we had actually done as an exercise yesterday. So let me share the screen, and then I'll call upon the groups. We had done with group 1 yesterday. Group 2 was also, and we were looking into group 4. Yes. So if Bharti madam from group 4 can come up and quickly summarize the learnings from yesterday's session. I'll unmute her. Yes, Bharti ma'am, you can unmute yourself, please.
Rekha madam is there with us.
Yeah, Rekha ma'am is there. Bharti ma'am, you can unmute yourself, please.
I'll stay for a couple of presentations and then leave.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, all. Here, yesterday we have discussed about the 2 key learnings, like importance and impact and effectiveness of the inclusive education.
Bharti ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Rekha ma'am will leave, and therefore I think it will be appropriate if I can request Dr. D.M. Ghodke, Secretary IQAC, to propose formal vote of thanks before Rekha ma'am leaves. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yes. Dr. Ghodke, please.
I seem to have interrupted your session.
No, absolutely perfectly fine, ma'am. You have spared your valuable time, and that deserves it.
Thank you, Professor Pingle, for giving me this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks. It was rather a wonderful session, and it explored us through this field of assessment and evaluation, which is rather a tricky area. And most of us ponder over the various possibilities to link our teaching with this evaluation system. So, ma'am, I'm very much thankful to you for enlightening us and motivating us to ponder over various possibilities of evaluation system, and at the same time acquainting us to the rubrics. So we are really very much happy being present over here and enlightening us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I think in the end he suddenly lost audio, but then yeah, we mean it. Thank you very much for joining, ma'am.
And all the best. We'll get back if there's any support I can provide.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd like to mention that Dr. Rekha ma'am has been, from the time we started planning for this workshop, she has been with us. She's helped us to reach this point of conceptualization as well. So thank you so much, Rekha ma'am.
And then I must make a mention that as soon as we had finalized this workshop, I had started getting compliments from the participants that wonderful team of resource person and wonderful topics that have been chosen. Thank you very much, madam. Bharti madam, if you can continue, please.
Yes, sir. So we did a discussion and have noted down some key learnings here. So the first key learning we have noted is the importance, impact and effectiveness of the inclusive education. The second key learning is a need for civic learning approach. That is about how to inculcate that civic learning approach into the syllabus that will lead to the reasonable citizenship. Sir, can you scroll? Yeah, for the second question, we have listed down the themes like democracy in education and vice versa. The second one is affirmative actions in education. And we have added the third one also, that is the impact of government schemes and policies and their implementation on the ground level. As we all know that there are many schemes available, but students are not aware of that. So we can try to reach out or reach out to the students with these policies and schemes. We can go for question number 3, sir. So please scroll. Hello. So in our earlier curriculum, like the practice was to cater the traditional homogeneous groups and the focus on the traditional subjects using the traditional pedagogy. But now in new curriculum in the college, we can focus on students' diversity, then student needs and aspiration. Sorry. My network is too much disturbance is there. Okay. Student diversity, then second one is students needs and aspiration, then skills development and employability, and psychological well-being, then responsible citizenship and effective parenting. So basically we need to focus a lot on to this into the new curriculum. That's all, sir. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. There was some problem with my connection. That's why probably I got disconnected for a while. Yeah, thank you. I'll probably now go to, if you all can see the screen, I'll go to next group now. Is the screen visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, it's visible.
Thank you. Thank you. Group number 5 is what we would discuss now. In the chat box, if somebody can come up, who is going to discuss? Usha ma'am, like said yesterday, though she'll not be looking to discuss. Yeah, Ishita ma'am said that they had done it yesterday. Then comes the group number 6, Meeta ma'am, and with her were, yeah, anybody from group 6? Anybody from group 6?
Meeta, Rakesh, no. Okay, let's move on, sir. Let's move.
Group 7, Nomita ma'am. Nomita ma'am, I'm unmuting you.
My voice is not okay. I've requested someone from my group to talk.
Shall I switch it over to Soni, ma'am? Or maybe Aarti, ma'am.
Yeah. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are, ma'am.
Yeah, hi. So on behalf of group number 7, we had jotted on a couple of points yesterday. So more or less all the points are like what has been covered. But just to put things in perspective, we looked at the 2 key learning yesterday. One was obviously the educational discrimination across socioeconomic group, which is against constitutional framework, which was very clearly mentioned by ma'am. And we looked at, how we could probably bridge the gap between these different social classes. So hence the backward classes and disadvantaged classes lose out on education due to social stigma in schools, colleges, and universities. And I think after yesterday's session, we really felt that we as academicians really need to do something about it. Ma'am had also mentioned the fact that they're not comfortable even opening up and saying that they're not learned. So that is one thing. Actually, there's lots more that we can say, but as we're running short of time, I'll quickly run through the points. Promotion of heterogeneous learning, which also our group felt is really important. So 2 or more themes that what we would like to explore further would be obviously civic learning approach to higher education, which was discussed by most of the groups yesterday, which we felt was a very good concept. And reforms to minimize inequalities in higher education. Now, I can also, in addition to what the other groups had mentioned yesterday, now, if we look at the inequalities in higher education, even from a placement perspective, like, for example, what we do in St. Xavier's College, we also look at not only placing students who are at the top end with a very high GPA, I guess I can't see the screen anymore. 1 minute. Well, somebody has, well, I have it open with me. Can we go back to the, yeah. So not only placing the top students at very good, we're also looking at everybody and inclusive education, and not only education plus also placement opportunities should be given to everybody. It's not just we look at big top companies and high GPA students as well. So inequalities even in not only education, placements, and how we measure measurable parameters there, and what processes was used for designing and developing the curriculum, and what changes we would like to bring. So processes used prior to workshop for curricular development, and the changes, probably we'll just go to the changes because processes are BOS inputs, industry requirements. Introducing experiential learning to introduce concepts and types of discrimination, how to overcome them. Introduce skill training in conflict mitigation through communication is kind of really important. We'll go to human values. A lot of, at St. Xavier's College, we look at values. We have special courses also. Professor Priya, Professor Mansi, Professor Perry, we're all here in this seminar. They'll probably relate with me. Soft skills, personality development, mentorship is very important. Mentorship program is which we follow very seriously, and we take it up very keenly in a college. Stakeholders, whether it is we take feedback, whether it's students where they go for internships or placements, or even parents. Parents are also stakeholders. Introducing multidisciplinary approach to fulfill diversity. So we can go ahead and do this in a better way. So inclusiveness for ethical, social, environmental issues, curriculum design needs to relate. And finally, incorporate all of this in a better manner so that we can bridge the gap and also enhance the teaching learning experience. I think that's about from my side. Thank you, Sybil, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I call upon Dr. Urmila Moon or Mr. Chinmay Tiwari to come across with what they have discussed in group number 8. I'll try to unmute Urmila ma'am first. She is joined with 2 profiles. I'll unmute the first one. In fact, I'll unmute the second one as well. Dr. Urmila, if you can come in, please.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Because our discussion yesterday mainly was focused on, social environment with respect to, all the disadvantaged sections, mainly belonging to different castes and religion especially. Our discussion also was, towards that area. So when we looked at all the 3 questions, we tried to, revolve around those 3 questions only with this topic itself. So the 2 learnings specifically, I would say that most of us have already mentioned that, we need to become more inclusive and have more civic learning approach as far as higher education is concerned. But our groups also talked about how it should be introduced at the school education level. And what exactly do we try to do here? Could we try to look into some of the points that we have given, where how it can develop the curriculum that comes into question number 3. So the learning specifically is, giving them more fair chance, by giving them more options of learning. That could be one way of doing things. Where the 2 or more themes that we would like to explore further in this area would be one of our colleagues, Chinmay Tiwari sir, he had mentioned that different pedagogical approaches need to be dealt with the social discrimination in school and higher education. That is what we came up with. And also we need to have, the platform for education institution, which can be used, to make it very inclusive as far as campus is concerned. So, the kind of activities that we do it for the students. And also there should be monitoring mechanisms, whenever we have these schemes in place, we need to develop some kind of monitoring mechanisms. So these are the areas that we would like to explore further. And coming to the question number 3, to be very briefly put up, because there are quite a few points, I'll be going a little fast here. So the question asks on what kind of processes we had. Everybody knows the kind of processes we had. But mainly, if you see that we had a single discipline approach, wherein more university affiliation was given due importance and significance. And the reason was that we wanted to encompass students from urban as well as rural areas. And now we have shifted to more multidisciplinary and industry-oriented needs as far as curriculum design exercise is concerned. So that is what we are looking at. And now how is the current process as far as designing and developing the curriculum is concerned, not only from the present day context point of view, but also we are looking at more future oriented. So one of the pointers given to me by Mr. Chinmay Tiwari sir was a paradigm shift from slavery studies to liberal studies. Another interesting point would be to make the curriculum design exercise, being more goal-oriented workshop, which can be conducted for our teachers, so that we can bring some more radical, improvements and changes. Also, if we can introduce at the first year itself, certain activities to read, to research, and to work in collaboration, to eliminate the negative thinking and carry out the social work in this direction, because learning by experience is more important to internalize the thought and practices. And this would definitely, bring a change in the predominant beliefs of the people. So when they are in their, undergraduate level, probably, we can have syllabus based, exercises where they can try to do something together. Of course, awareness programs we are all conducting in this direction to minimize the social discrimination. However, more importantly, continuous training of executives who are involved in the change and monitoring of programs of schemes, which we are, trying to introduce, should be also carried out from time to time. The need for lifelong learning mechanisms for learners to develop academically and connect socially, very important activity, because once they are out of the college, they may not really be connected to education anymore. This is again from the point of view of people who come from the socially disadvantaged section. As I mentioned, that our discussion went on revolving around this point, because our main yesterday's discussion was focused on that. So this can be done through various activities of vocational courses that we can have, or kind of sports activities we can have. And another important point is that we can give them, exposure of cultivating their democratic norms by exposing them to literature, collaborative work projects. This may be reflecting modified behavior and practices, one has towards the disadvantaged groups. Another very important point, I think even when yesterday's speaker, we had put up the question, she also mentioned that there's not much which is reflected in NEP. So, NEP and such other policies need to be first considered, first should look into, the changes required at the grassroots level, and then we should ladder it up to higher education. which will be more inclusive, and also funding requirements needs to be categorically assigned to these groups specifically. So this is what the whole discussion and the pointers. In fact, yesterday I couldn't write, so later on I could add some more because I was not having the editing thing. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Urmila ma'am. We'll hear the expert comments of Sybil madam later on once we finish all the 10 groups. May I invite? Thank you, ma'am. May I invite Dr. Subhashji Shinde from group number 9? Or
yes. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to request Dr. Seema Purohit madam from our group to present, because all of us participated in discussion, but she was leading the team. Even she did the entire typing work. So I think honor should go to her. Yeah.
Seema madam, I have requested you to unmute yourself. If you can please unmute.
I have unmuted myself. So a quick what we have. So we have enlisted the key learning outcomes from yesterday's session. The first outcome is the spread of education expanded, but differential access, inequalities, social parameters are not yet addressed yet. So that was a grave issue in that. And discourse in education dominated by outcomes. That is also what you can say the restriction is there. Then there are issues with curriculum. Actually, the present curriculum is too Dhisapata type of curriculum where no adequate representation of experiences are there. Then representation of dominant group is always there. Then classroom transactions are generally dominated by socially privileged groups. And the campus culture outside the classroom have deeply embedded in caste, religion, or gender-based stereotypes. And rest of them, everybody has mentioned. So I will just go through it. Now the next is the list 2 or more themes you would like to explore further. So like everybody said, incorporating civic learning approaches into curriculum design, how to do that. Everybody was of the opinion that if any of the resource person can throw the light on this, that what exactly, how to go about it. Then how to overcome the fragmented nature of current initiatives and the need of cohesiveness, and how to imbibe the deeper commitment in the teaching fraternity. So that is we would like to explore. One strong feeling is how one can infuse the employability into our curriculum. Though we have the skill-based education or value-based education and so on, all those components are there, but it's still whenever it comes to placement or whenever it comes to the employability, we always think of some additional qualities that our students should have. So that was the point number 2. Point number 3 was what process was used for designing. So earlier it was the conventional setup with a monodisciplinary approach, and because of the workshop now it was really an eye opener for us, where we have started thinking over that how one can bring the multi or inter or cross or meta disciplinary approach with measurable outcomes and continuous learning. So that is the two I mean that was almost a paradigm shift from our earlier psychological or frame of mind, and we are going towards the change set of framework. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And we move down to the last group, group number 10. No name is written over here. I just, if somebody can, write it down in the chat box. To whom does this group belong to? Group number 10. If anybody can please come in the chat box at least so that I can unmute them. Group number 10. Yeah, all right. So, Sybil, madam, I guess we should go with the exercise for the day. I can volunteer if no one is there. Dr. Poonam Deshpande wants to come in. Yeah. I'll unmute Poonam, ma'am. Yeah, Poonam, ma'am, please. If you can unmute yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible. Thank you.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Yesterday we had a very nice discussion, and as you can see, the group number 10 is the last one. All the points were already being discussed, whichever has been, coming into our mind. But we have kept very specific because 2 or more key learning it was there. So we thought that because the discussion was more on, equality and equitable quality education for all. So we thought that how to look from the perspective of management, how the college, they need to be more inclusive within the autonomous policy, that how our management can really help us in giving some extra maybe financial or some other kind of the marginal or the lower people who we differentiate on the base of maybe economical or maybe rural or urban, that kind of thing. So we thought that from that perspective also we should be more clear. And then second thing, the learning was promotional activity for equality in higher education. It should be planned. It is very, very, very important thing. So we should be planned, like we have a yearly calendar. It should be planned to eliminate the bias among various socio-economic groups. So there should be a sensitization of this also. We should plan such activity so that this can be inculcated into all the stakeholders. Then themes, I'm so glad if we would have written something else also yesterday, we would have proven today. So we have thought that workshop on implementation of OBE and implementation of methods for measuring learning outcome, which can help all autonomous college to quickly adopt the method. So this is what topic which were the main thing which we were discussing, and today we have got the solution. So thank you for that. And uniform ERP system for autonomous colleges, whatever can be, we can help each other. And then some theme focused on workshop where autonomous colleges can share their experiences and extend help to others in implementing autonomy. And this is what we thought. And planning and implementation of a student mentoring system. Okay, so this is because we think it is a lifelong process which can have an impact on student for lifelong. So we should have something on how to plan and implement this kind of system. And then preparation of curriculum, keeping in mind multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary and metadisciplinary approach. So we are now clear of, but then how we can prepare and how it can be implemented. So this was one of the thing. And the last was previously we used to follow set university norms for designing a curriculum. That I should admit, everybody in my group, they agree to this. But now after this, can you, sir, scroll the screen a little bit? Yeah, I wanted to see my pointers. But then after this workshop, we would like to adopt following changes, focus on skill development and employability. It is one of the major thing, and we have to brainstorm that how we can really bring into practice and blended learning activity and collaborative opportunity. Yesterday, we had a group from humanities and science. So we thought that it is a very good topic. And then inclusion of liberal education, as we all are talking about all these 3 days. And we thought that courses for administrative services like BA in administrative services or something like that, which can help in our government system also, and that we can teach right from the undergraduate level. And faculty exchange program in autonomous colleges, intercollegiate project-based learning activity for students also, which we always say that, okay, there is a, different schemes which people go on, like from Lions Club, students are getting exchanged to different countries or so. So that can be promoted in autonomous colleges, even for teachers and students. And last is that how we will now plan our curriculum, that how we can keep measurable outcome in our mind. So this is just the summary of what we have discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Sybil, ma'am, shall we go for the activity now? It is 5:22. I thought that we will probably give them 25 minutes, but then do not go for discussion today. How do you suggest it? Pabrekar sir is also here.
Yeah. Good evening. Good evening. I think
evening,
there was in the group 10, I think Madam Dharin wanted to add some points, and she also wrote her name. If you can just adjust her, just request Dharin Badrina Madam. I think she also wrote in the chat box. Maybe she's from belonging to group 10. Just check, I mean, in case if she's there. Or otherwise,
Zareen madam, you can unmute yourself, and if you have some inputs.
I have unmuted myself. It was just that there was nobody there, so I just wrote my name. We have discussed it enough. It's fine, and everything is okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, please continue.
Yes, sir. So now we are about to start the exercise for the.
You are unmuted. You have to unmute.
Yeah. Sorry. Like yesterday, it should not happen that people do not get enough time to present. So I thought we'll give them enough time to work on the exercise rather than presentation as of today.
That's right.
Sibyl, ma'am.
Yeah, I think that would be good. So they will break up into groups. They will discuss, and maybe last 5 minutes just bring back to give common announcements, and we'll take up this suggestion later.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So I guess we'll break now and meet again at 5:50.
Yes.
Yes. So the participants are aware of the usual way of breaking down into groups, and the the link for the document has already been shared in the chat box. So
what is the exercise given today?
So based on today's talk, it was on evaluation and assessment.
Okay.
Yeah. So on that basis, what have been the evaluation methods we have been using, and how do we see the evaluation methods evolving in our institution?
That's right. Okay.
So
Good,
that is point of discussion today, and the link has been shared already. I'll share it again, and then one of my colleague will break you all into 10 rooms again, like yesterday. So come up with a very nice discussion on the Google Doc sheet that has been shared here. And we meet back again at around say 5:50. Thank you.
Okay.
आणि डिटेलिंग द्या.
Welcome back, everyone. I was hopping around in the room and many of you were waiting with their task done already. And others just waiting, doing some networking, inquiring as to which college their co-participants are belonging. And now you all have probably come across many participants whom you can network together. And it was really quick today. Economics. Yeah, back into the rooms now. Let's just check Sybil madam is there.
Yeah, I'm here. Yes,
yeah, ma'am.
Yeah.
If you can unmute and tell us about how do we proceed with this exercise, the outcomes of this exercise, and what we are going to do tomorrow. Thank you.
So just to summarize as to what we have done today, and as I was going through the Google Doc, though we would take a detailed summary tomorrow, we've seen that most of us have really caught on to this whole aspect that assessment should be continuous. Assessment could include multiple ways. It should be based on our objectives, and there could be, and based on the objectives, there are a variety of ways in which we assess our students, etc. These things seem to have been coming very strongly, and I think coming very well through this whole exercise that we are doing. Now, I do understand that what you're looking for, friends, is like how then can we make assessment more creative? Two, you are looking for, I saw one or two of the groups strongly talking about how assessment should be community-based engagements can be assessed. How do we prepare rubrics? And finally, how do we map this whole thing of CO, PO, and assessment? Now, definitely, we would not leave this 5-day FTP before at least giving you a glimpse of what this would be done, how it could be done, and what could be done. But I want you to remember that if we remember on day one, when we said right now, the emphasis after the NEP as well as the theories in assessment, it talks about immediately after learning outcomes, we talk about assessment. How do I know I reached? Yeah, so that's what we talked about, backward mapping. So assessment no longer is the last component of our planning of curriculum, but assessment now has shifted its focus to the second important criteria, that is, first, where do I want to go and how do I know where I want to, how do I know that I have reached where I want to go? Yes, so this is called as backward mapping, for which we have also seen how we could look at it linearly with all what we have seen. So now how do we begin to relate an objective with the assessment? Now, though we would deal with it, I want to leave with you two thoughts. Firstly is mapping of these different things is not going to enrich, okay, the entire exercise of assessment alone. Okay, it is only going to tell you that you have your blocks in order and you know what to look for in that. Second thought that I would want to put before you is when we map assessment practices, etc., that we with the objectives that we are doing, let us remember that these are something that is unique to you as a teacher. It is that special flavor you are bringing into the teaching and learning exercise, and therefore methods don't ever look for a standard way. We can give you a blueprint, but don't ever be enslaved by these frameworks. Think of your
personality, your own skills and gifts that you have, and therefore how unique, and your students, what they come from, the backgrounds they come from, and uniquely try to blend the two. Now that's what something that I was thinking right as I was reading these 2 points, is what we need to think about is it is your design and creativity based on your skills, interacting, your personality, interacting with the diverse group of learners, and we will see how do we map these different things, but that is not going to really get us into the depth of what really assessment could offer us until and unless we are willing to be open to even a conversation had with the student as a mode of assessment. When I'm able to pick up the different vocabulary that you use, is there a change? Is there a change in the way the student is expressing, thinking, and doing things again? So every minute of our classroom interaction is an assessment practice. Okay, that or assessment in action is what happens in every moment of a classroom interaction. So with these few words, we would not want to delay. We have been doing that quite. You have been very kind with us to stay beyond time. But today, I think think about the course for that task 3. We have already given Dr. Pingle. They have got the task 3, right? The template that we have provided.
No. They have not yet received the template as of now.
Okay, so we would probably send that template or share the link of that template to all of them.
Yes.
And start thinking now, how do you start filling this? It's a curriculum, like we put headings as what are the important points which a curriculum document should have. So we've put those important, you could add more. These are just some basic structures that what should the curriculum document have as headings. Yeah, so that once it's sent to you, please start thinking. Tomorrow we'll explain what we expect as an outcome of task 3, which individually you would have to submit to the organizers and to RUSA as well. So we'll do that tomorrow. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Honorable Pabrikar, sir, Senior Consultant RUSA is with us also. Sir, do you want to share something?
I want to just would like to know 2-3 points. I will not say anything more. I'm indeed very happy because, I could see that this is a participative kind of faculty development program. It is not a monologue. I mean, dialogues are happening. And the output is definitely going to be very, very interesting. As I could see that, I have some suggestions. The groups which have been formed by you, I think they will remain same, right? There are 10 groups. So from every group, the members are same.
No, I'm sorry, sir. This is random picking done by the Zoom software.
Yeah. Otherwise, what I was thinking of, I mean, maybe there are 2 more days left out, right? I mean, we have all the details and all the records of every participant. And then, I'm thinking of suggestion. Of course, I'll talk to Principal Joshi also. That can we come out with something like, output of this FDP as a participative FDP, as in the form of ebook. We can give this participants some more days, give them some questions, right? As designed by Madam Sibyl. Let us have their thoughts on that. It can be a kind of, I don't say it's a research paper, but their views on what they have learned and what is the output as far as the FDP is concerned. So, once we get on that, then we'll get it evaluated from Madam Sibyl and their entire team. And we can think of, because, this is the time now that we have to train the trainers kind of, we want a good teachers. At the same time, we would like to know how the teachers are involved in curriculum designing. These kind of views which are coming up. If we can train this entire group of people further, right, we will definitely get good kind of, resource persons available for training the people further. This is my suggestion. Let's see how we can go about it. I think Madam Sibyl, you will agree with me.
Yes, very well said, sir. We can convert this into a kind of a research document for us to capture kind of thinking.
Yes. So you think of that, we can give them some more. After the FDP is over, we'll give them a gap of 10 days or 1 week, whatever. Let them write, maybe in a group, maybe individually. Then we can, analyze that, scrutinize that. You can do some modifications that, and let us come out with some kind of ebook out of it. It will be a good resource material available for thinking on how to develop curriculum designing, use of pedagogy, and the kind of inputs given by all the participants. So interesting. I'm very happy. I will of course pass on the message to Principal Vijay Joshi And of course, thank you, Madam Sibyl, that you have been taking all kind of efforts. Srihari, now you can understand as a part of organizer how the things are, different. And then we also learn, even though I'm a retired principal and teacher, but teacher never remains the retired. You always learn, right?
Yes.
So thank you very much to all my participants, friends over here. Thank you, Madam Sibyl, and thank you, Srihari, and your principal, Gaikwad, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm learning each day. Thank you. I have put in my mobile number in the chat box just because now I want to get in touch with 4 teachers who have volunteered. Dr. Shabib sir, Dr. Poonam Deshpande ma'am, Dr. Anita Goswami Giri, and Dr. Ishita madam. If you could mail your drafts to me, I'll forward them to Sibyl madam, so that when we come up yesterday, we have clear thoughts on what we want to discuss. So yes, Prashant Shah sir, you also want to volunteer. Can you please interact with me on the mobile number which I have just shared, and we'll discuss in details on the mobile. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with this, we formally come down to the end of today's proceedings. I thank respected Pabrekar sir for being present here. Respected Sibyl Thomas madam, of course, like every day, Jyoti ma'am, and all my dear colleagues, and definitely all the participants who stayed back till 6:01. And I call it an end for the day. Thank you very much. We'll join back together with the permission of...
My suggestion
yes,
to Srihari, tomorrow
yes,
you
sir.
announce all the participants. Now, when they are waiting for 3 hours, can't they wait for 10 minutes more? I could see that the number is going. It's not, they have to, each one of them has to respect the Madam Sibyl who has been, finding out some more time, the entire team.
Yes.
So
True.
our request should be there to on the every day, tell them till you say it is closed down, nobody will leave the room, right?
Sure, sir.
My
Sure,
suggestion,
sir.
of course.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I think we all respect the opinion that Dr. Pabrekar has shared, and we'll meet again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
With the permission of our principal, I declare the session.